Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The dog heard her first. That was the thing Marcus Hale would think about for years afterward. Not his own instincts, not his military training, not any of the hard-earned awareness he had carried home from 2 deployments overseas. It was Blaze who heard her. Blaze who stopped dead on that empty sidewalk, ears sharp and forward, a low sound rising in his throat that Marcus had never heard before. Not a growl, not a bark, something between the two, something urgent and grieving at the same time. Easy, boy. Marcus tightened his grip on the leash and looked around. What is it? The wind pushed hard down the street, scattering snow across the pavement in long, thin ribbons. Burlington was quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that only comes when a storm means business, when even the most stubborn residents have decided the world can wait until morning. Marcus had been walking Blaze the same route he walked every night, down Elmwood, left on Pine, around the small park, and back. 4 years of the same walk, 4 years of quiet evenings that sometimes felt peaceful and sometimes felt like something closer to loneliness, though Marcus would never have used that word out loud. He was 42 years old. He had served 12 years in the United States Army, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had come home with a body that still worked and a mind that sometimes didn't cooperate the way he needed it to. He had built a small real estate business, owned a few properties around Burlington, and lived alone in a clean, orderly house that he kept the way he had kept his bunk. Everything in its place, nothing out of order, no room for mess or surprise. Blaze was his one concession to softness, a German shepherd he had adopted 3 years ago from a rescue organization that worked with veterans. The dog had saved him in ways that were difficult to explain to people who had never felt the particular darkness that sometimes settled over a man who had seen too much and come home to too much silence. But tonight, Blaze was not calm. Blaze was pulling. Marcus followed the dog's gaze across the street toward the narrow gap between 2 apartment buildings, and that was when he saw her. She was so small that for a half second his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. A child, standing alone in the snow, in the gap between the buildings, wearing a pink coat that was far too thin for this kind of night. No hat, no gloves. Her dark hair was dusted white with snowflakes, and her arms were wrapped around herself in the way small children hold themselves when they are trying very hard to be brave, and the bravery is running out. Marcus crossed the street without thinking. He knelt down in front of her on the cold pavement, bringing himself to her level, the way his mother had always done with him when he was young and something was wrong. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice as calm and gentle as he could. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" She looked at him with eyes that were enormous and dark and filled with the particular terror of a child who has tried everything they know how to try and has run out of options. Her lips were trembling. Her cheeks were wet, not just from the snow, but from tears that had been falling long enough to nearly freeze on her skin. "Sir," she whispered. The word was barely audible over the wind. "Sir, my mommy won't wake up." Marcus felt those 5 words hit him somewhere deep in his chest, the place where soldiers keep the things they don't talk about, the place where urgency lives, coiled and waiting. His whole body shifted into a state he recognized from the field, sharp, focused, every unnecessary thought gone. Blaze stepped forward slowly, the way he always did around people who were hurting, and pressed his large, warm nose gently against the little girl's hand. She looked down at the dog, and something in her face broke open, not in grief, but in relief. She wrapped both arms around Blaze's neck and buried her face in his fur, and the dog stood perfectly still, steady as stone, letting her hold on. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Ava," she said, her voice muffled against Blaze's coat. "Ava Bennett." "Ava, my name is Marcus. Can you take me to your mommy?" She pulled back and looked at him, searching his face the way children search the faces of strangers, looking for something trustworthy, something safe. Whatever she found there was enough. She nodded and took his hand, her tiny frozen fingers curling around his. She led him half a block down the street and into a small apartment building, the kind of building Marcus knew well. 3 stories, older, the kind where the hallway lights flickered and the radiators knocked through the walls at night, and the carpets in the corridors had been the same carpets for 20 years. They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and Ava pushed open the door to apartment 204, which was unlocked, and Marcus understood with a quiet, sickening clarity that this little girl had left her sick mother alone on the floor, walked out into a snowstorm, and gone looking for help in the dark. She was 4 years old. Inside the apartment, it was warm, but the warmth felt fragile somehow, like something hanging on by a thread. The living room was tidy in the way that spoke of effort, a woman working hard to keep things nice despite not having much. There was a small Christmas cactus on the windowsill, a child's drawings on the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, a single reading lamp on in the corner, casting a soft amber glow across the room. And on the floor, beside the couch, Laura Bennett lay motionless. She was in her early 30s, slight and pale, still wearing what appeared to be scrubs, the kind nurses wore. One arm was stretched out at her side. Her breathing was shallow and fast, and when Marcus pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, her pulse was there, but weak and unsteady, fluttering like something that wasn't sure it wanted to continue. Her skin, when he touched her forehead, was burning. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, and while he spoke to the dispatcher, calm, precise, giving the address and the symptoms the way he had once given coordinates, he watched Blaze move to Ava's side and sit down beside her. The little girl had her hand pressed flat against her mother's arm, and she was saying very softly, "I got help, Mommy. I got help. Please wake up." The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. To Ava, Marcus imagined it felt like 11 years. They worked quickly and professionally. Asking Marcus questions, he answered as completely as he could, and within minutes they had Laura on a stretcher and were moving toward the door. One of the paramedics, a young woman with red hair and a kind face, paused and looked at Ava, then at Marcus. "Is he her father?" she asked, nodding at Marcus. "No," Marcus said. "Is there family we can call?" Ava shook her head slowly. "It's just me and Mommy," she said. The paramedic and Marcus exchanged a look over the child's head. Marcus felt something settle in him, quiet and absolute, the way decisions settle when they are not really decisions at all. "I'll stay with her," he said. At the hospital, Marcus sat in the waiting area with Ava pressed against his side, Blaze lying across both their feet, heavy and warm and present. Ava had stopped crying. She was past crying now. She was in that still, exhausted place that children reach when they have been braver than anyone their age should ever have to be. She held one of Blaze's ears gently in her hand and stared at the floor. The doctor who came to speak with Marcus was a quiet man in his 50s with careful eyes. "She's stable," he said. "Severe diabetic shock. Her blood sugar had dropped to a dangerous level. Combined with exhaustion and what appears to be the beginning of pneumonia." He paused. Her body was simply overwhelmed. She'd been pushing herself far past her limits for a long time. He looked at Marcus. If that little girl hadn't gone out tonight and found help, her mother would not have survived until morning. Marcus looked down at Ava. She was asleep now, finally, her head heavy against his arm, Blaze's chin resting on her knee. A 4-year-old child, a pink coat, a snowstorm. 5 words.
He sat there for a long time in the quiet of the waiting room, listening to the hospital sounds around him, the soft announcements over the intercom, the distant footsteps, the particular hum that institutions have at night. And he thought about courage. He had been around courage his entire adult life. He had seen it in men and women who ran toward things that every human instinct screamed to run from. But he had never, not once in all those years, seen courage that looked like this. Small and cold and terrified, and going forward anyway, because there was no one else.
When social services arrived, a tired, decent woman named Patricia, who was doing her best in an underfunded system, she explained gently that protocol required Ava to be placed in temporary foster care while her mother recovered. Marcus stood up. "No," he said. The word was quiet. It was not angry, not aggressive. It simply allowed for no alternative. "She stays with me." Patricia looked at him carefully. "Sir, you're not a family member." "No," Marcus said, "but she knows my dog, and right now that's more family than she has available." It took phone calls and paperwork and the patience of everyone involved, but by midnight, a temporary emergency guardianship arrangement had been authorized, and Marcus drove home through the still falling snow with a sleeping 4-year-old in the back seat of his truck and a German shepherd pressed close beside her, watching over her the way soldiers watch over the people they've decided to protect. He set her up in his spare room, which had been empty for 4 years. He found an extra blanket in the closet, his mother's, old and soft, and tucked it around her. Blaze settled on the floor beside the bed without being told. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at this small person in the yellow glow of the hallway light, and felt something move through him that he had almost forgotten the shape of. It felt like purpose. It felt like being needed. It felt like the opposite of the particular silence that had filled his house for too long. Over the following days, Marcus brought Ava to visit her mother every afternoon. Laura was recovering slowly, her body fighting its way back from the edge with the same determination Marcus suspected she brought to everything in her life. She wept the first time she saw Ava walk through the hospital room door, and she reached out and held her daughter for a very long time without speaking, and Marcus quietly took Blaze into the hallway to give them that moment. He learned her story in pieces. Single mother, no family in Vermont. Her parents were gone. A sister in Oregon she had lost touch with. She had moved to Burlington 3 years ago and had built a life through sheer will. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, mostly at a nursing home where she cared for elderly patients with the kind of genuine tenderness that people either have or they don't. She was 4 months behind on rent. She had been ignoring symptoms of illness for weeks because she couldn't afford to stop working. She had been falling, slowly and invisibly, and there had been no one there to catch her, until a dog heard a little girl crying in the snow. On the day Laura was discharged from the hospital, Marcus spoke with her in the quiet of the corridor while Ava and Blaze waited near the elevator, Ava telling the dog something very serious and important in the confidential way children speak to animals. "I own an apartment building on Crescent Street," Marcus said. "There's a unit on the first floor that's been empty for 2 months. I'd like you and Ava to have it." Laura stared at him. "Marcus," he continued, "the building needs a property manager, someone to handle tenant communications, maintenance calls, minor bookkeeping. Flexible hours, good salary, health insurance included. I've been handling it myself, and I'm not very good at it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked down the hallway at Ava, who had now apparently decided that Blaze needed to know everything about her favorite cartoon, and was explaining it with great seriousness, one hand on the dog's broad head. "Because your daughter walked into a snowstorm alone at 4 years old to save your life," he said finally, "and I figure a person who raises a child like that deserves a fighting chance." 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in March, Marcus sat in a folding chair in the gymnasium of Ava's preschool, watching his first ever children's dance recital. The lighting was soft, the music was slightly off-tempo. The children on the small stage moved with the beautiful, total commitment of people who have not yet learned to be self-conscious. Blaze sat beside him. The school had made an exception after Ava had explained that Blaze was family, and families should be allowed to come. His ears up, his eyes on the stage with an expression of dignified interest. When Ava spotted them from the stage, her face transformed. She waved with her whole arm, the way children wave, her entire body behind it, pure and unguarded joy. Marcus raised his hand. Blaze's tail swept the gymnasium floor. Marcus thought about the man he had been 5 months ago. Orderly, solitary, going through the motions of a life that was safe and empty and slowly, quietly diminishing. He thought about all the nights he had walked that same route in the dark, looking for nothing, finding nothing, coming home to silence. He thought about the sound Blaze had made when he heard her, that low, urgent, grieving sound that had said, without any words at all, "Something is wrong and we need to go." Real wealth was not what he had spent years quietly accumulating. Real wealth was sitting in a too small folding chair in a school gymnasium, watching a brave little girl dance with a loyal dog pressing warmly against your leg, and understanding, fully, finally, without reservation, that the family you need doesn't always look the way you imagined it would. Sometimes it comes to you in the dark. Sometimes it's wearing a pink coat and shaking in the snow. And sometimes it finds you because a dog, loyal, quiet, and wiser than anyone gives him credit for, simply refuses to walk past someone who needs help. The value in this story runs deeper than its warmth. It speaks to the silent crisis of single parents, mothers and fathers working impossible hours, holding everything together with no safety net, invisible to the systems that should support them. It honors the instincts of our veterans, men and women trained to protect and serve, who often come home carrying both great capability and great loneliness. It reminds us that children possess a form of courage that adults sometimes forget is possible, a pure, uncalculating bravery born entirely from love. And it holds up the bond between a dog and a human being as something genuine and irreplaceable. Blaze did not hesitate, did not calculate, did not look away. He simply knew. This story asks each of us to consider what we walk past in the dark, what small voices we might hear if we slow down enough to listen, and what might change for someone else and for ourselves if we simply choose not to look away. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you believe in, please consider subscribing to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every story on this channel is written for those who still believe in goodness, in loyalty, and in the quiet kind of courage that never makes the headlines but changes lives every single day. Hit that subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling us what moment touched your heart the most. We'll be here with another story whenever you're ready.